Hi everybody, it's Marcus Collins and Andrew Dixon from the MA Properties Online team. We are here to do a buyer's seminar, Smart Strategies to Succeed in Today's Competitive Housing Market. And it's definitely one of those, I think you'd agree, Andrew. It definitely is a competitive housing market.
It's, I think, a lot more competitive than people were anticipating it would be. Well, we anticipated it would be because we were thinking about long ago about what the supply would be like going into this time of year. But yeah, it has proved out to be very competitive.
So this evening we are going to, or if you're looking at this later in the day, hello. So it's not this evening, but today we're going to look at smart decisions, and on that, what we mean is we're going to take a look at the housing market from a statistical perspective, and I'm going to focus this evening on Lexington. We have a lot of information for a lot of different towns, but this evening we're going to focus on Lexington, although we'll take it in a rather broader context too, as well. As you'll see, we'll talk about what we think back to normal means and so on. So we're going to take that as well. Then Andrew's going to take over and look at what the buying process is, how you can be smart about that process, tailoring that ever important search, and then the offer process. And then I'm going to wrap up at the end. We'll give you a sense of kind of where we are today. Not so much the process, but okay, here we are in June 2020. Actually, what does this mean to buy, or how difficult is it? So let's take a look at smart decisions, and specifically we'll take a look at the characteristics of the local market. And as I said just a second ago, we're going to focus tonight on Lexington. So here are the headline numbers for Lexington. The median price 2019 was 1.2 million. And the graph, even though this is a piece of clip art, the shape of this is very accurately represents the way the market went. So 2005 was the last high point. Then we had a drop down to 2009. That was the crash, if you will. Didn't really see much of a crash here. Massachusetts in general didn't see the hit that many parts of the US did. And then we've seen a steady rise in prices, with perhaps the exception of 2019, all the way through to 2019 with that 1.2 million price tag. And that's about a 66% rise since the peak in 2005. So ignoring the crash, just going back to 2005. So in a little over 14 years or so, we've seen about a 66% rise in house prices, which is quite impressive, actually. So,
very impressive.
Indeed. And we see those numbers in many towns. Look at Arlington, for example. You will also see very similar numbers. So the popular towns, the good towns, if you will, good school system, good commute, all get that sort of increase. So delving into the details a little bit more, this graph shows us the inventory levels. As you can see, in that kind of 2010 through 2012 timeframe, the inventory levels were quite high, upwards of about 200 or so homes were available to buy. This is, I should explain what it is. It's a graph that shows you how many homes are available to buy on the first of the month. So the first of every month I go out and say, okay, how many homes are there to buy? And I've been doing that for well over a decade now. And so we're looking at what's important about this graph is the long-term trend. As you can see, as 10, 11, 12, we had about 200 homes for sale in the peak of the spring market. And then there was this dramatic drop in 2013 that has continued almost since. Reality is that what happened in 2013, and we see it in almost all towns, 2013, the buyers almost came out of the woodwork. They said, you know what, the recession is behind us. I'm fed up of being in my rental. First-time home buyers came back into the market en masse, and that kind of kept them, or got the market going, because as first-time home buyers come in at the bottom of the market, if you will, in price, so it allows everybody else to move up or off as they downsize, as it were. So really, the 2013 was really a key year, specifically here in Lexington. If you look at Arlington, it started in 2012, so it's a little more gradual. That's the first-time home buyer. Arlington price point, $821 is the median price for single family, $600 for condos. So that's much more a first-time home buyer market. They came into that market in 2012, not in quite the numbers we saw then in 2013. So there's a kind of gradual drop as you look in Arlington. Coming more up to date, as you can see in that 2019, we saw a large rise in inventory levels in comparison to 17 and 18 anyway. And so there's a lot to kind of unpack in that to get a sense of what does that mean, and is that high inventory level going to continue into 2020 and potentially on. So let's kind of delve into a little bit more detail to try and see what's going on in 2019. This graph shows you the number of homes that are sold, again in Lexington. And as you can see, we saw a peak in 2015 and then a gradual drop through to 2018 and then flat into 2019. What's happening here is people who would ordinarily move out of Lexington, downsizers essentially, have decided very much to stay put, and age in place, if you will. One reason is it's difficult to buy the next home. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But also there's this perception that there's high appreciation currently in Lexington, and therefore why don't I stay where I am, get the appreciation on my 3,000 square foot home, 4,000 square foot home, and then at some point I'll move to a 1,500 square foot home. But right now I'm getting lots of appreciation, so I'm going to stay in the larger home that I'm in. So we saw a gradual decline from 2015 in terms of the number of homes that were listed and the number of homes that were sold. So both those came down. What happened in 2019 can be shown in this graph. The blue bars is the number of properties that sold. The orange line is the number of properties that were listed. And as you can see, in 17 or in 18 and 19, we've got more listings coming on the market, but the number of homes that are selling is relatively flat. So we've got increasing supply, but flat demand. And what that means is we get a net increase in inventory, and that's what we saw in the inventory level graph that I showed you a moment ago. What does that mean for prices? Well, even though it looks like we saw a modest increase in 2019, if you look a little bit more into the details, that rise in 2019 was really caused by a shift in the number of homes that were, the price point of the homes that were brought on the market. So more expensive homes came on the market in 19 than they did in 18. And so that potential increase from 1.15 to 1.2 is really a facet of a kind of skew in the prices and the homes that came on distribution rather than true price appreciation. So we've seen relatively static price appreciation 17 to 18 and 18 into 19, caused by that increase in inventory, but demand being relatively static.
Right. You would sort of expect with that increased supply and the static demand or decrease in demand for maybe average prices go down, but that explains it. The increase in the actual price of the homes that were sold artificially brings that up, sort of, or makes it look like it's.
That's right. The distribution changes, so it skews even the median. If you show the average, it's even more, because an average is more affected by distribution than median is. But yeah, that's exactly right. That's a facet of the distribution changing, right, as opposed to the truer price appreciation. It definitely wasn't that. So, big picture, what's happening, what's driving the housing market? And it can be really explained quite simply with this graph here, which is from the Census Bureau, which shows us how many people are in which age bracket. So, as you can see, the way this is structured, 0 to 4 at the bottom, 85 plus at the top, and the length of the bar tells you how many people are in that age bracket. So it's the demographics, if you like, of the United States based on age. And there are two areas which are important. I'll highlight those in yellow here. The first one is that 55 to 50 to 59, this is about 5 years ago, so really it's kind of 55 to 60 today. Those are the baby boomers, the children born after World War II. They have now got to the stage of retirement and therefore downsizing. And so they are driving the market as they look to move out of their 3,000, 4,000 square foot home into a more modest home, because they don't need it. The children have left home and so on. So they're looking to downsize, kind of go down the housing ladder, if you will. The lower bar are the millennials, and there, as you can see, there's quite a lot of those. There's kind of a big, wide band of millennials, and those are the first-time home buyers. Those are the buyers looking to get into the market as a first time. And when you think about a town, not necessarily like Lexington, but if you think about Arlington, first-time home buyers like Arlington because it's relatively affordable. Say a condo, median price of a condo in Arlington is about $600,000. Median price of a single family about $800, compared to 1.2 here in Lexington. It's a vibrant town. It's close to Boston. It's got a good school system, not fantastic, but a good school system. So it's ticking an awful lot of the boxes for the first-time home buyers. But it's also ticking a lot of the boxes for the downsizers too. Relatively close to where they live. They don't have to move very far. Their circle of friends remains the same. And so we've got the downsizers trying to move into, for example, Arlington. We've also got the first-time home buyers trying to move into Arlington. And that's why we see large price appreciation in Arlington, much more than we see in Lexington. But it's also one of the reasons why the downsizers were unable to buy, because they were competing with the first-time home buyers. So that was kind of the big picture we were seeing in 2019. And then there was this perception that there was going to be economic uncertainty. And that was all the talk in early 19. And it kind of dampened down in the middle of 19, but then came back again at the end of 2019. Remember, this was all pre-COVID. And so as we looked at what was going to happen in 2020, it was very much driven by economic uncertainty. And that turned out to be accurate in that the United States was dipping into a recession in the early part of the year before COVID kicked in. Now, of course, we've got all this uncertainty around COVID, so that kind of layers on top. But it's important, and the reason I went through what our predictions were for 2020 back in January, because as we get back to normal, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about when we think that may be in a minute, we think we'll be back very much to the situation we were in late 2019 and early 2020 when we come out of this. So my predictions for 2020 were that we would see more sellers in the market because of that economic uncertainty and the thought that maybe I should move today because prices perhaps have peaked. If I stay another 2-3 years, then I'll kind of chase the market down. So they came into the market really in that 18 and specifically in 19. But with a static number of buyers in the market, and therefore the market was going to be tending towards a more balanced market. You know, it was traditionally a seller's market, certainly in 15, 16, 17, but now we're tending to a more balanced, which is kind of evenly balanced between buyers and sellers. Back in January, we were talking about economic uncertainty. We still have an election. I mean, that still has to come along. But as right now, there's a lot of other things happening. Economic uncertainty for another reason, the election. And there seems to be a lot of crises, if you will. Certainly that's how the newspapers portray them, but there's certainly a lot of issues that the US, as well as the world, is dealing with, and that kind of layers on top of that. And so what we predicted in 2020 was that for 2020, we said we would get static price appreciation. And I think that's probably accurate, although now we need really to look at what's going on this year, given what's happened in March, April, and May, and so on. So I think it's important.
So it's likely to happen, but just kind of shift ahead in time.
Right. I think we'll see this later on in the year. Depends a little bit on how many homes come on the market in June. I'll kind of talk about that, but you're right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly the point, Andrew. Yeah. So let's bring us right up to date and see where we are. And I want to specifically look at the listings in 2019 versus 2020 because I think it's important. But first of all, we should look at where we are. There's lots of talk right now about Texas and Florida and Arizona about how they're kind of going up. We are not. We are actually coming down. This is data I pulled about 3-4 days ago, and as you can see, our trend line, both in testing, which is the grey line, and orange line, which is the number of cases, is declining, and that's really important. Let me skip over one because I put this in slightly the wrong order. Back to normal. What does that mean? Back to normal. Well, here's another one. This is the number of deaths from COVID, and as you can see, that's very much declining which is a good thing. So we in Massachusetts do seem to be ahead of the curve, if you like, ahead of the rest of the country. Hope is, of course, we can stay there, and everything kind of looks quite positive. Interesting to look at the number of listings, which is what we see here. Now, blue is the number of 2019 listings, so that's our benchmark, if you will. And the orange bar is the number of 2020 listings. Excuse me. And as you can see, January, February were on par, and so was early March. I split March into two because second half of March we saw this definite difference between 2019 and 2020. 2019, in Lexington, we were seeing something like 40 listings. That number was halved in the second half of March. Remember, this is the middle of the spring market, really. That continued into April. We saw a net decline in April as well. Second half of March and April, that's when we saw the big decline. And then as we got into May, sure, there was a little bit less in the early part of May, but we're about on par with where we want to be in May. Interestingly, as we get to June, we've got less than we would expect. I predicted that we would see more listings in June than we saw in 2019. That may not be the case, but time will tell. And excuse me for jumping back because I put this slide in the wrong place, but here's an interesting way to look at that data. Blue is the 2019 listings cumulative, so you see it increases as you go through the year, done by week. The orange bar is the number of listings in 2020. Where it diverges, where my cursor is now, is the second half of March 2020. And you can see 19 carries on up, 2020 dips. And what you can see, the difference between those curves is the listings that we are missing, the listings that we would ordinarily expect to come on the market, but they haven't come on the market. So that's a bit of a problem. So if I look at how that might play out for the rest of the year, because I jumped forward, this was what we were predicting for 2020 for projections. So January through May are actuals, June through December are estimates. And we predicted that we would see a lot more homes coming on the market in June as we kind of got back to normal. People who wanted to list their home but were unable to. Now, as things begin to ease slightly, so they're beginning to bring their homes on the market. And we are beginning to see that. It looks like now, as we kind of get towards the middle of June, that may shift a little bit more to July. We're somewhere between about 50 to 70 listings behind, depending on how buoyant we thought the year was going to be. So we're quite a way behind where we would expect to be. It does look like, given the run rate we've got for June, that we're in this projection I front-loaded June. I think perhaps what will happen is we'll need to kind of move that out of June and into July and August. So it does look like that sellers are still a little bit hesitant to bring their homes on the market. The buyers, on the other hand, are out in force. They are absolutely out in force. That's for sure. Out in force. So, what about the future, I guess, is the question. What does this mean for the future? And I think it's interesting to look at, excuse me while I bring this up, actually. This was a study, this has come up from a while back, actually, that McKinsey did, in terms of, what's going to happen when we come out of this? Which of these different shapes are we going to have in terms of the economy? Is it going to be a V-shaped recession? That is, we go in this case, it would have been went in that late March timeframe, and we'd expect to come out in the May, perhaps early June timeframe. Or is it going to be a much more prolonged exercise? I think it's fair to say, as we see what's happening in the world, that it is going to be very much a prolonged exercise. If you think about what it would have taken to get a V-shaped recession, first of all, there are a lot more shapes there which are U-shaped than there are V-shaped. There are very few V-shaped. And essentially, in order for it to be a V-shaped recession, we'd have to get everything right. And I think it's pretty clear, given if nothing else,
And I think early on that was the prediction too, that this would be a U-shape, just from economists and people have seen this before. Back after the last recession we had, it was very much U-shaped, and a lot of that is dependent on the type of economy we have. We have a very service-based economy and things like that. So it would make it would make sense that it would be a U-shaped, and it's playing out that way.
It certainly is, yeah. Like fingers crossed it was going to be V-shaped, but it was just never going to happen. I think it's fair to say, just was never going to happen. I think to some extent we are not quite immune to this, but we are certainly not going to be in as bad a shape as other parts of the country. And just an anecdotal story, I was listening to a discussion with a Florida-based realtor, probably, a month ago now, perhaps 3 weeks ago. And that realtor said that as they went into the lockdown and as they saw it kind of play out, not that they have much of a lockdown in Florida, that what he did was send all of his agents on foreclosure training, because they anticipated, they do anticipate that there were going to be lots of foreclosures and short sales and that. And so I think as we look at where we are in Massachusetts, that's definitely not the case. We're not sending our agents on foreclosure training. We never really did have a lot of foreclosure and short sales. But I think that kind of gives us gave me pause for thought anyway, that sure, we look to be doing okay in Massachusetts. Our economy is clearly it's going to take a hit. There's no question, and certainly, as you said, Andrew, in the service economy especially. But we're going to fare better, I think, than many parts of the country. And this kind of anecdotal story made me think, yes, that's probably the case. We will see clearly some people who are unable to make their mortgage payments, but not on the kind of scale that clearly they anticipated down in Florida and other parts of the country. So
yeah, I believe it was maybe 60 Minutes or one of a news show had a realtor, I think from Arizona, on, who was Realtor of the Year last year and was now collecting unemployment. And here we are. So just, it's a very different environment here where we're dealing with multiple offers.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely the case. And as we talk about the rest of it, we've got, if you think about buyer confidence, and we show some graphs later on about when buyer confidence kicks in, buyer confidence is no question it's back. There is still the logistics of selling a house, and if you're living there, but when it comes to buyers, they are back in force. I mean, that's for sure. And so as we think about this from a buyer's perspective, with the U.S. economy may well be, in a poor shape, but in Massachusetts, the lack of inventory and the fact that there is confidence in the economy, and I think confidence that even though we've clearly had a lot of uncertainty over the last few months, there is a feeling, I think, that I get that Massachusetts has got its act together and is actually going to fare better than many parts of the US. And that's giving buyers confidence that they can come back into the housing market. I sat on the sidelines in March and April, maybe some of May, but right now I'm back. And we have stories of 3-4 offers. We had one in Burlington 2 weeks ago where there were 20 offers on a home.
20 offers, yeah. I was involved in a deal that had 15 offers recently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So and as we talk about, as we get on to the next section, really talking about the process of finding a home, I think it's important that buyers realize that today anyway, this may change as more inventory comes on the market over the next month or so. But as we see the situation today, it's very similar, I think, to the situation we see in February, where there are not many homes on the market, but the buyers are out. So very early part of the spring market, very much, a situation where the buyers want to buy, but the sellers are not quite ready to bring their homes on the market. And I think that's where we see ourselves, at least what looks like for the next few weeks, if nothing else. Perhaps the latter part of June and July will bring more homes on the market. But right now, as you said, Andrew, 15 offers on one that you were involved in, 20 offers on a house in Burlington, and so on. So
yeah, and I think people who are watching this are either from or around this area, and I know most of the people, fortunately, that we interact with have been very busy. They've maybe been busier than they've ever been working from home or however they're managing to do it. But it just sort of it says something about how things are working a little bit differently here than the rest of the country.
Right. I think it definitely does. Anyway, enough of
Yes.
me. Time for Andrew to talk. Time for you to talk, Andrew. It's all yours.
All right.
Smart process. Information is power. So what exactly am I looking for?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously, if you're thinking about buying, there's sort of three big pieces to this. One is obviously, help you find the home you're looking for, and then the other big piece of the picture is actually to obtain that home, because right now, like we were just saying, there's multiple offers on properties. So if you're finding a home that you like, because it's managed to check off all these boxes of the things you're looking for, it's also doing that for all these other buyers that are out there. And then, hopefully, if you get past that point, then it's bringing that home to a close and a successful conclusion. So, and so beginning that whole process, I would say, it's just finding out what's important to you, the buyer, right? It's and around here, is it your commute? Well, right now, there's not a lot of commuting. Commuting's a dream if you are commuting right now, but the proximity to Boston is very important. Maybe it's public transportation. Maybe it's access to. There's a lot of business on 128 and in Boston and Cambridge. School system is obviously a big for buyers in choosing a town. I think most of the buyers I talk to have children, unless they're moving, downsizing. The schools are very important, and also the town itself. So Lexington, for instance, it's also a town that's pretty fiscally responsible. It's located in the right place. But then when it comes down to it, once you select those towns, then you have to say, hey, all right, how much can I afford? And you're working with your lender to see what's affordable to you to get the kind of home you want in a town you want, right?
That's true.
And the other thing, so, it's like, you obviously, when you're searching too, you have needs and you have wants, and it's always a good idea to categorize those things and to figure out what must you have versus what are real wants. What are the things I need to have in my home? Do I need to have the school system? Like, do I have kids going to the school system? Do I need location? You don't want to be commuting from the North Shore down to the South Shore. You want to know, is your family, you plan to expand your family? How long do you plan on being in this area? So you need to, what kind of a home in terms of size are you looking for? But then there are other things that you may just want, like maybe you want more yard space, but those are things that that you have sort of variability with, right? So if you check off all your needs, and maybe you give up on a couple of the wants for maybe a location, maybe you want a quieter neighborhood, maybe you'll give up a size of your yard because, hey, you know what, I'm very close to my school and the kids can play there and it's a great neighborhood, etc. So it's things like that we always need to think about. And I think we point out, I think you have it on the screen here, that it's it's always important to include everyone in the process when you're starting out. Get all the information out and share it with your agent, and just really understand together the whole family that's making this decision, the decision makers and the agent, to start working together from the start and be on the same page as you get going. And also to also initially work with find a good quality lender who can look at your financial picture and give you a realistic sense of what you can buy. And then from there, that doesn't mean that's what you're going to buy. Maybe you don't want to spend that much money. Maybe you have different plans, but it's good to know going in to the process, knowing what you can afford, and then how much of that you can't afford you want to spend. And also, it's a very critical, as we were talking earlier about the importance of being, when you have multiple offers, you really need to be prepared to step in and be able to make an offer once that home comes on the market, and put together a compelling offer. But what you really need, it's mandatory really, to have a seller consider your offer, is to be a well-qualified buyer. So have your financial picture up front and ready to go, and go from there. So that's once you've established this budget as we have up here, you need to spend, how do I want to say this?
I don't know.
Oh, I know. Well, anyway, I just say, basically, it's one of the major key things that we look at when we're looking at homes. It's like, what can you really buy? What are you comfortable with? And once you have that down, then you can step forward with a very powerful and compelling offer. So,
right. But it's important to do this up front. I think that's the key thing to mention.
That's really my point.
Yeah.
Is this is not something to say, hey, let's go look at houses now. I think I want to buy a house. These ones look good. It's A, you don't want to waste your own time looking at things that you can't afford. You really need to understand this picture, but you also don't want to be surprised in the end. I've worked with a couple of people in the past who unfortunately felt like they were in a position to buy spend a certain amount of money on a home, and only to find out sort of in the last hour that they really needed to shift and kind of start their search all over again. So we really recommend that everyone work with someone and get their financial picture straightened out. All right.
On the other slide as well, it's important that many times, and specifically in first-time home buyers, the people buying the home are not necessarily all the decision makers. It's quite possible. In fact, one of the agents in our team is working with some buyers today where their parents are providing them some down payment. So
right.
If you're getting financial help, perhaps to some extent, even if you're not getting financial help, certainly as a first-time home buyer, make sure you bring everybody on board, so that there's no surprises when you've kind of, hey, I found this home we really like, and one of the key decision makers says, well, I'm not really sure about this town. Are you sure it's the right town? Are you sure it's the right house? You make sure you bring those key decision makers. It isn't necessarily just the buyer and the two buyers, if you like. It's often a kind of a wider group of people that need to kind of get involved within that decision. So it's important to kind of bring all of them along, so that when you find the right home, that you've already established it's the right town and everybody's bought into that process, and then you don't kind of end up, I found the house, and everybody starts asking, well, is this the right town? So make sure you kind of bring them all along.
Yeah, and two points to that is, one is, in this environment, you don't have time to start having that discussion.
Right.
You need to have that. Set up front. And the other thing too is, that's the thing you need. Those types of things you need to disclose to your lender, and that's why it's good to talk to a financial expert and just understand this, because you may be thinking, oh yeah, family's helping me out. I can just provide this down payment. Well, there are actually some sort of rules and things that we need to know about, that the lender is going to want to know about to make sure what's allowable, and you have to understand what the tax laws are, so they can help you out with that. What is a gift, versus et cetera. So there's a lot of information that it would be really beneficial to have put everything out up front. Just basically full disclosure, and start from there.
And one question I often get as well is, so I go to Bank A to get my pre-approval. Am I required to go to Bank A for my mortgage? And the answer is no, you're not. You can go to Bank A for the pre-approval, and then as you get an accepted offer, quickly, don't linger, but don't dawdle, but quickly you can then begin to shop around to see if there are other lenders that have the right product, the right rates, and so on. We talk a little bit more about now, but get the pre-approval. Don't worry too much about which bank you get the pre-approval from, because you're not obligated to buy using that lender, and that's kind of important. So yes, go with a reputable lender. Clearly that makes sense, but don't agonize too much over that, because you do have the option when you get an accepted offer to kind of go elsewhere for.
Absolutely. What happens too is, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they have certain rules that qualify people for loans that everyone has to follow, but different lenders have different portfolios, different packages, and there might the one that's the right fit for you as a particular buyer. Maybe you may do it better with one lender over another one. But initially, getting that pre-approval right away is important, and any good lender can do that really quickly. It's a quick form to fill out. It's a quick conversation just to get the process rolling. But really, then after that, just make sure once you settle on a person that you can work with, that has your best interests in mind, that you feel comfortable with, then you step further and just make sure you disclose everything you can to them. So there's no surprises going down the road, and you're really, when it's time to make that offer, you are prepared.
True. So,
right.
Tell me about the buyer agent. What is the role of the buyer's agent?
Oh, well.
Because I have we get this quite often from buyers. I don't understand what the role of the buyer's agent, specifically as a comparison with the listing agent.
Right. Well, so our goal obviously is to help a buyer find their home, but not only that, get them the best price and terms that they can for that home. Terms could be, there are different terms on it, whether it's home inspections or closing dates, etc. But we want to get you the home that you like for the best price that we can for you. Now, what we do now, the buying process is very, mechanically it's sort of the same, right? But every deal is different, and you hear this, and it's because there are different people involved. There are 8 different agents involved. There's attorneys involved. There's home inspectors sometimes, and lots of different personalities and things like that. So, in any sort of deal, it's really important to have someone who's experienced, who works well with other agents, who works well with their clients, who works well with third party people who help make this process go along, because it's really key to, when you're dealing with all those different personalities and different unique situations, every home is different. Every home has different characteristics you'll come across, and there's usually something comes up, whether it's one issue or multiple issues. And sometimes the issues aren't with the home itself. Sometimes it's the people involved, and really someone who really can work and guide someone through this entire process to get to the conclusion you're looking for is really, really what you want. And so the role is also, we really talk about here, especially, and I've always felt this way, and one of the reasons I love being part of this team here is they feel the same way. It's really about education, right? We know the market. Obviously, earlier we just went through all the statistics on the market in Lexington, and we could probably spend hours going through them if we really wanted to, but we wouldn't bore you with that.
Let's not do that.
But we really understand the market, and it's really about educating the buyers so that you, as a buyer, can make the best decision for you. All right. We want to guide you through that process, and so that it's a comfortable offer. You're not just hoping things are going well. We also they're managing the offer process. There's a lot of steps in that too. Aside from crafting an offer, in this market, as I said, when you have multiple offers, we really work hard to, if it's a home you want, you're putting an offer in on it, and we want to make that offer successful. And we have maybe anywhere from 3 to 19 other offers. How do you come out in front on that? And it's got to make sense for you, but there are ways to make that happen, and we want the buyers to feel comfortable in doing that and show them how to do that. And then, then once we get an offer and it's actually accepted, then you got to get to the closing. And that's really, early on, I think a lot of people just feel like, well, what is the agent doing? Well, we're helping you find a home, of course, and we're educating you along the way. But a lot of the work comes after the offer is accepted. There's a lot of steps going on. Anything you may have an inspection, getting through the purchase and sale, you're going to be working with the lender to get the mortgage done. But we got to make sure, if that's what you're doing, that you have all the contingencies in place you need to make, so you're safely going through that process. If any issues do come up during a home inspection, how do we deal with that? How do we negotiate that? What makes sense? Maybe is it a home to pass on, or is it a home to work with? And how do we make that happen? So we want to be a real good resource for you on the area, not only just the area, the housing stock, but also the process and all the variability, all the variables that come out of it that can come up. And it's that sort of experience and education that helps make that a much smoother and more successful process. I see here you have talked about the commission, and no, so the commission here in Massachusetts, comes from the sell side of the so the seller is paying their listing agent commission, and anyone who brings a buyer to that receives a portion of that, and that's how we get paid. So it's no cost to the buyer at all.
So compare that to the listing agent, because there are clearly two different roles, right?
Right. So, and I like that you put up here that the listing agent works for the seller. It's also there's agency, and any good agent, the first time when you first meet, it's a Massachusetts rule law that you disclose to them what agency is. So there are buyer's agents, seller's agents, facilitators, et cetera. And we would disclose all that information, how that works in Massachusetts. So a listing agent works in the best interest of the seller. Now, a buyer's agent, we are going to work in the best interest of our buyer. So in that process, we sometimes see buyers think, oh, I'll just go directly to the listing agent. Maybe I'll get a deal or something like that. And that's really not how it works. Now a buyer is directly working with a listing agent, and who is that person working for? Not you. They're working for their seller. So they're not looking out for your best interest at all. They're looking out for the seller's best interest, and you're not really going to save any money because the seller is still obligated to pay the same amount of commission per their contract to that listing agent. And their objective then too is also to get the best price and terms for their client. So now you have two agents, experienced agents, hopefully working together to do sort of the same thing for each of their clients. And that's where experience in negotiation and how to craft a good offer and what to do after the fact comes in hand, becomes really valuable. What else? Did I miss anything on this list? I don't have
there you
my
go.
glasses.
I think this kind of sums it up, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this really is, as you know, like this is a huge step for people. As we work in the business, so we see a lot of houses sold, but for each individual person or family, we understand, to keep this in check and really understand what a huge decision and a huge investment this is for our buyers. And it's really important that when a buyer is making this step, that they have someone really guiding them and giving them good advice and helping them make good decisions, because the last thing you want to do is get to the end of that process and then say, what did I do? Why did I buy this home? Or really, I could have done better on this home. I really didn't know this about the area. Anything that can go wrong. I think a buyer's agent is just invaluable, especially a good one who is willing to really work with you and understand your needs and look at your best interests as they're supposed to. And what else can I say about this? We start, the process begins, as I say, working with your budget and your beginning of your list. But a lot of times we find that things evolve and change as you start to get to know people and get to know the buyers. It becomes a relationship involved, and what it turns out, hey, maybe things that sounded important at first maybe aren't so important, or maybe as you go through this entire process, you realize that there are other important factors that you haven't considered before, and sort of getting through all those issues and finding a home that really does make sense for you in the end, that you can afford, that is right for your family, and something you feel good about. And so when you walk at the end of this, you're happy you went through this process, and you're happy when you come home to walk in that front door. I think that's really one of our goals.
That's the key, and I think the key word there is relationship, and compare the difference between a relationship between a buyer and a buyer's agent on the one hand, which is one, as you said, that evolves over time and continues after the transaction. And the opposite, and perhaps to some extent, the listing agent route is a transaction. This is not a transaction that involves buying a car, which is very simple. This is a much more complex transaction, and that's why, for us anyway, it's about a relationship between the buyer and the buyer's agent, a tight relationship, a trusted advisor, if you will, as opposed to a transaction where you're just buying something. It really isn't that simple, and so it's key that what a good buyer's agent brings to the mix here is that understanding that this is a long-term relationship through this transaction, but on forward from that as well, perhaps to your next transaction. It is very much a long-term transaction. That's kind of the key in terms of why those the two together can make that kind of dynamic duo, if you will, as we put on this slide.
Yeah, it's very common. So it's not just transactional, but the last thing you want is someone who's just out there to help you. Oh, you like this home? Yeah, I'll help you get that home. Hey, wait a minute. If that's really what you want, and we've gone through vetted our process and really understand what you're looking for, then yes, then let's get into the transactional piece of this. But in the end, it's really more about, the relationship, as you said.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. So, smart buying. Here's the key. Being one step ahead of your competition, and as we've said before, you said and I said that there's definitely some competition here. And I think it's important to understand what today's buyers want, because there are two ways to approach this. But what is it that today's buyers actually want?
Well, yeah. So basically, essentially, it comes down to there's a couple different types of home. If you want to just split it up a couple ways, and one of them would be sort of more turnkey, right? Everything is done. You don't have to worry about anything. You move in. Maybe you want to change the paint color of a room, but you really could move in. There might be a few things you want to change, but essentially you could move in and just live there because it's what you're looking for. But the issue with that is if it's ready and it's like that's the premium on that. That's what a lot of people want, and that's going to be a very, very competitive situation you're going to put yourself in. And so you need to understand that going in. It can be done, but the flip side of that is, hey, maybe there's a home that might need a little work or things. A lot of times people don't have as much vision with how a home can become something that really suits them. And there's a couple things. That's another reason why, especially I like really understanding and working with fields. I've done some renovations myself, and I have a bit of a background in architecture and things like this. So that's why working with clients and really understanding what they're looking for in a home. Maybe you show them homes. I like to say, well, I know you're looking for this type of room, maybe an open floor plan. This doesn't have that, but guess what? This can be like that, and this is a much cheaper price point, and it's going to be less competitive. And if you're willing to either invest some money or invest a little sweat equity in it, then in the end, that may be a better suited property for you to buy. It's kind of what makes sense for you and what do you want.
Right. So, strategy one: take on the competition.
Okay. Oop.
I guess what it says is, as you mentioned before, that if you want a home which is move-in ready, so does everybody else. That's the key.
They do.
Right.
Yes.
This is where the bidding wars happen.
If you love this home, someone else does too. That's really.
It's a great way to put it.
Yes. And it becomes, and at that point also, it also can become a very an emotional decision, right? At that point, and so that's another good reason to have sort of guidance from a buyer's agent to sort of keep it in check a little bit, not to discourage it. And I'm not saying that at all, but if this is, it's just to shed light on what is this we really want. Am I getting over emotional about this thing, or is it the right home? And then how do we if it is, then how do we deal with that situation? And we do have ways of dealing with that. Like I said, I just had a buyer who on our team, I think we hear a lot of times that we get buyers who are in these multiple offer situations, and I think a lot more times than the average, our buyers end up coming away with the home because we really understand how someone can be successful in these multiple offer situations, right?
Right.
So really, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's about setting expectation here. That I want a home that I could just move into. I don't have the time to do anything. I just want to move in, and it's about setting that expectation that's not going to be maybe an easy, but it won't be a cheap house thing.
No, there's a cost for that.
That's the key.
There's a cost for that. Yeah.
And
knowing that up front.
Right. The graph underneath may be hard to see, but it shows the average sell price to list price ratio. In this case, it's for Arlington. And as you can see, the average sell price to list price ratio is well over 100%. So that's the sell price to list price is lists for 700, sells for 700. That's 100% sell price to list price. So the average in Arlington is upwards of 103, 104%. So that's the average, which means there are a lot more.
And that's an average.
Right.
That's an average, right? So there are homes that are going from far more than that, but then there's also the homes that are going for under average, right? So where do you fit in? Which homes is right for you? And if the home you want, expect to pay more than the average if it's one of those exceptional properties and you want that exceptional property. So understanding that going in is really key.
Alternative, strategy 2.
Yeah. Well, this is it. Oh, I'm sorry. It's what we were talking about before is finding that place that. So what we like to do when we have listings, I'm just going to flip this for a second and say, if you're working for a seller, what we talked about before was the goal was to get the highest price in terms for that seller. And one of the ways to do that is to make that property look as good as it can, right? So you have properties on the market that either are in exceptional condition and look great, and sometimes they're in exceptional conditions but don't look great. And sometimes they're just not in such, and neither. Sometimes they're just not looking so great. They need some work, etc. Or they just can't be bothered or just unable to present the property as well as it can. And that's where I was talking about earlier, where you can decide you can invest in either some sweat equity or hiring people and say, hey, I can make this home. I'm willing to do this. I have the time. I have the resources. I'm going to buy this home, and maybe I'll get it for on the lower end of that average, right? And buy that home and then invest in that home. And then when it comes time to sell, you'll make those renovations. They'll then make it the home you were looking for, and you'll have gotten it for a little bit cheaper. And you'll have certainly, as long as you make some smart choices in the decisions you make on putting that property, you definitely want to understand in making decisions on what you want to do, what's a good return on your investment. But you also want to make it a place that's for you. But that's the potential out there. It's out there. So that's the other strategy, to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to deal with all these bidding wars. I can't handle this. It's tough, or maybe my budget for the type of home I want won't permit me to get into those types of bidding wars. Well, all right, here's plan B. Here's strategy 2. Let's go look at some houses that have potential, right? Right.
And I think strategy 2, both strategies actually, I'm thinking about it. Strategy 2 definitely requires a good buyer's agent, because you can see a home which needs some work, but the key thing is you need to be able to prioritize things like location, layout, the things that can't be fixed by a trip to Home Depot, essentially.
Right. Right.
And that's the key. That you need a buyer's agent to advise you on, yeah, this home is, it's a fixer-upper, but hold on a minute, it's in a poor location, or the flow just doesn't work, or it's too much work. And that's where I think the buyer agent comes very much into this. It's not about crafting a successful offer, which is strategy 1. For strategy 2, it's about saying, yes, the fundamentals, if you like, of this home. This home we sometimes say, has got good bones. It's a home that, yes, it was worthwhile spending money on. And that's where a good buyer's agent comes in, because you don't want to buy it, think you're going to fix it up, and then find that, well, actually it's too hard to do it, or it's a poor location. The area can't command what I've created by putting that sweat equity in.
Well, that's right. That's right. You don't want to be the house that on the high end side that doesn't fit the area, right? You don't want to be that anomaly when you're all done with it. And you also want to just, if you're up for the task, you also, some people, maybe the shiny object isn't so shiny, like this brand spanking beautiful house. Well, guess what? It's a house that's in a very poor location, and when it comes time, there's a reason it's being sold for maybe what seems like a great price for that home. It's because of the location, and then you're going to have that same issue when you go to sell. That's an issue, but really the biggest issue is you have to go to that home, walk into that house every day. Are you going to be happy there? Are you going to be happy in that location? And really that's the key. Are you going to be happy in that home?
So what can you do? That looks like that. I love the left one. What can we do to the left one?
Well, we can turn it into the right one. it's a very this is easy. This is a dramatic difference if you look at these two photos, right? But what have we done here? I think we painted the cabinets.
That's just about it, actually. Yep.
I don't think there's much different there, really. Maybe we added a newer light fixture and obviously some nicer furnishings. But here, what we've done is we've got a clear countertop. I think the appliances are the same, but all we've done is painted the cabinets and brightened it up a bit.
Yep. Actually,
Simple.
I know the story behind this. The light wasn't changed. It was literally, this is just paint.
Is it? Yeah.
All it is. That's all it is.
It's
just paint. That's key.
Yeah. So you're right. So walking into homes, like if you walked into the home on the left, and then you walked in and looked at the home on the right, how much difference? What would you expect to pay for these two homes? Would it be the same price? Probably not, right? And for very little effort, you can make home on the left look like the home on the right. And
so
and a lot of people maybe don't have that vision, which is another reason you want to be working with a buyer agent who really either does have that vision or has the experience to see A to B, left to right, and say, yes, I know you're looking for this, and this doesn't look like it right now, but it can be. Trust me, and I'll explain how.
Kitchens are a key one. Guess what? So are bathrooms.
Yes, they are. I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing paint.
Yep, that's all you're seeing. Just paint, actually, and taking the window shades off, that was it. That's all there is. That's the only difference between those two pictures.
Right.
Because the tile has actually been painted. The tile on the walls has been painted, not on the floor. But that's key. You can just say the biggest return on investment when we talk to sellers. What we sell them is the biggest return on investment is paint. It gives you a huge return on investment, and just the difference in these two is simply that the pink tiles has been painted a lighter color.
Right, and I don't know how long that type of paint has been available to actually paint tiles. What is it they put down? It's a paint that basically is a primer that works on top of a tile like that. I think years and years ago, if you wanted to change the color, you'd be ripping out tile.
Right, and you don't need to. That ripping out tile is really expensive. This is really cheap.
Yeah.
Same with carpet.
Oh my gosh.
There you go. Same room.
I think
that's the same room.
It's amazing. Well, anyone who watches the renovation shows on HGTV and things like that, you see the before and after, and it's and sometimes they do major work on those properties, but really there is a lot of simple things you can do to turn. I think most buyers, if they walked into that house on the left there, would turn around and walk out before even reaching the top of the step. But understanding what it can be, hey, this could be the right place.
Because sometimes you can just take the carpet up and underneath the hardwood floors, and that carpet's probably been down for 20 or 30 years at least.
Yep.
And so underneath you have pristine floors.
Yeah, if you get a good painter in there, can paint, make any repairs in the wall that need to be, and take down that wallpaper comes down.
Yep.
I don't know, half an hour in that room, maybe. They would have it down, and some nice furnishings. What do we have? Another picture up here?
Yep.
Oh my. Well, that's a space on the left. It doesn't look like, it looks like someone hung out there, but I wouldn't want to.
It doesn't look like it, does it?
No. It looks a little dark and drab, and what do? We took down the wall paneling there, it looks like, and some paint and carpeting.
That's it, actually, and many people will have this wall paneling in a basement. All you need to do to that wall paneling is actually paint it. So that wall paneling has actually just been painted. So you can turn
the wall paneling still up?
Leave it where it is.
Yep.
That's all you have to do. So very easy to do.
Yeah, it's a dramatic difference. It's looking at that. It's from a place you would enjoy being in, and versus a place that, I think you'd be very depressed in.
Yeah. Same with the outside. Again, pretty straightforward to do. Makes a huge difference.
Massive. Massive difference. Just this is simple. This is just some yard work.
Right. So two strategies to think about. Strategy one, move-in ready. You're going to pay a premium for it. Strategy two, cautious what you buy. Cautious in both cases, but cautious what you buy with strategy two. Put that sweat equity in. Convert the left to the right, as you've seen in all of these pictures, and lo and behold, you'll end up with a home that will give you that extra equity. As Andrew alluded to, if we were giving this presentation from a seller's perspective, what we would tell the seller is you should get a landscaper in there and just landscape your yard or do it yourself, because that will make a huge difference, because lo and behold, it will appeal to a large number of buyers who really want to move in ready home and are willing to pay top dollar for it. So kind of these are the two different perspectives, from a buyer and from a seller, but the same thing applies. Are you willing to do the work, or are you, do you want that move-in ready? And then it comes down to how do I craft a really successful offer. In the case of strategy two, it's about, okay, is this house got good bones? Is it a good location, good layout? Is it just a case of just taking all the paint the paneling, paint the bathrooms, paint the kitchen? Is that all this actually takes? So that's kind of the key between those two strategies.
Yes, it's amazing what a short amount of work can accomplish, and you may want to do some further projects down the road, but you want to make it a place that you enjoy going home to at the end of the day. I said this earlier, and if you're happy walking into that home, and maybe you have some ideas later on that you want to do something else, that's great too. But understand what you're getting and what you're getting for your dollar and what you're willing to do. So, it's all about being prepared ahead of time. And again, I really do think it's key to work with a good buyer's agent that can point these things out to you, and also understand whether that's something you're willing to do, or maybe you're not. So then you can just eliminate those from the process if it's something you just know you don't want to deal with.
Right. Exactly.
So it's really that relationship again, understanding, being on the same page, and but also education, adding advice, maybe pointing out things that you hadn't thought about before.
So, smart search, finding that needle in a haystack. How do we go about doing that?
Oh yes, well, as we talked about earlier, we talked about this earlier. So it's all about sitting down and really understanding, getting everyone who's part of that home buying process on the same page, whether it's one person, whether it's the entire family, extended family, etc. Understand that. Let's get all that information out there and start talking about what you want, and then also getting that pre-approval from the lender to really understand what you can actually afford, and then how much of that you can afford do you want to buy. Inevitably, a lot of people kind of end up pushing that or really liking the homes. They're sort of the top end of that, but some people are just, from a practical point of view, say, yes, I can spend this much money, but you know what? Understanding that I want to spend X amount less than that, and that's fine too. So from there, now we have what you need and what you want, and you understand what you can buy. Now we're going to move forward and work on that process of how do we find this home. And we want to narrow it down, look at the towns you want to look at. Are we looking at the commuter? Are we looking at the schools? Are we looking at, what else are we looking at? Like maybe you have a place someone likes to go skiing up in Vermont, and so they prefer not to live on the South Shore and have that extra commute on the weekend. Or just understanding all the things, that factors that go into your lifestyle and the things you want for your family or yourself, whoever's involved in this buying process. And then once we get that down, then we can start putting together a search for you. We set it up in MLS. That's the database. I know people like to everyone looks at Zillow, Realtor.com, but MLS is where all the listings go from. That's where all those other sites pull that information from. So it's to create a search that fits the buyer. And then we do research on those towns, and start looking at the properties, and then working together to kind of get a feel and kind of narrow down exactly what you're looking for, and understanding exactly how the town and how you fit and it works, and then within those towns, what makes sense for you. Maybe you're willing to be in a certain town to get a little less house because it's a more expensive town and you're fine with that, or maybe you want to be in a town that's a little less expensive so you can get a bigger house. But anyway, we're going to help you narrow that down and fine tune that till we find the house you want. And it's all about evaluating all these properties along the way with you. And of course, in terms of how we do that now is a bit of a different process, but It's not like you go out and look at open houses so much anymore. So really understanding how to make that happen as things stand today is really important too, because we want to. It's difficult now to get into homes, or more difficult. It's easing up now, but you really want to understand how can we evaluate these properties ahead of time to see if you want to get in there yourself to make that next step, right?
That's true. And one thing that we have on, as we say, we're a data-driven approach to real estate, and so one of the things that we have on our website, I won't show you the website for the time, but there's a lot of useful information there that you can use to do much of this evaluation of towns, especially by just looking at the database of data we have. So this is sales distribution. Turns out it's for the town of Arlington. Blue lines are the existing homes and green is the new construction. But as you can see, an awful lot of homes sell in that 700,000, 6 to 700 is kind of the busiest price point. So if you're looking, if your budget is around 700,000, Arlington would be a great town to start looking in. As I said before, it's very much a first-time home buyer's town, but it would be a great town to be searching in. If I do a comparison then with the sales distribution in Lexington, remember, median price in Arlington 800, median price in Lexington 1.2. What you can see is that a lot less homes come on the market in that 700,000 price point. So you can use this data. I've chosen two towns which are very contrast very well with one another. Here's Arlington, here's Lexington. You can see that difference. Lexington, if you're looking for a house in the 1 to 1.5 million, it's a great town to be looking, or perhaps even higher, 1.5 to 2. It's a great town to be looking at. If you're looking at 700,000, much more difficult to buy, and what that means is you should be adding towns to your search. It's not that you should discount this town, you should bring it in, but perhaps you need 3 or 4 other towns around in the area in order to get you a sizable number of properties, which means you have a higher probability of being successful. So that's kind of key. So there's lots of information on the website that kind of
and even other towns. I mean, just anecdotally too, I had someone who was looking sort of around this area, right? But they were not from Massachusetts, and they'd sort of stumbled across this home in another town a little bit further out, and just did a drive-by as they were, and said, hey, we're kind of interested in this house, which seems like this great property and great house, and it was a nice looking property and a beautiful looking house, but it was probably the most expensive home ever sold in that town. And that's fine if you like it and you like the town and you want to buy it, but just know the buyer pool for that town, it's you.
Right, for that house,
it had been sitting for a long time, and just to understand, looking and saying, just by looking at the data, you can find out a lot of information that, hey, maybe if I want to spend this much money on a home, or maybe this town, I'm going to eliminate this because I'm not going to be able to sell it later.
Right, absolutely. You can do work both ways. You bring towns in, but you can also exclude towns because their price point is too low, or exclude towns because their price point is too high. You can kind of get all of that information from that sales distribution. Okay, all right. So tell me how to craft a successful offer. At least, first of all, I guess we should understand what that offer process is, and then you would kind of layer on top how to craft that successful offer.
Well, okay. So here's the thing. So the basic steps are laid out here, right? To accept, usually when someone submits an offer, they usually put a deposit to bind that, or a binding check. It's a binder. It says, hey, I'm submitting this offer, and here's, say, typically $1,000 will come with that, and they'll say, okay, so if the offer is accepted, that money gets deposited into an escrow account, and that sort of binds that offer until you get to the next step. So you have a little bit of skin in the game, so to speak. Typical offers would maybe have a home inspection. Here in Massachusetts, it's a sort of a 2-step process where you go to a purchase and sale agreement after the initial offer, and there may be contingencies within the offer. And one of those contingencies might be a home inspection, and that usually happens, say, within a week of an accepted offer. And what you want to do is get to the purchase and sale is typically about a week out, right? 7 to 10 days max we would see. And then at the time of that purchase and sale agreement is when you put down an initial deposit. And a lot of times we see various amount numbers. Very typically it's 5%, I would say. Sometimes you see less, sometimes you see more. And then, you know, part of that offer too is you want to submit certain documents with it, right? We talked about earlier having that pre-approval, so they know the seller knows you can buy that property if you're getting a mortgage, and then you'll have a mortgage contingency date based on your lender that says, hey, I'm going to apply for this mortgage by this date, typically around the P&S date, and then the lender is going to commit to me by a certain date before the closing, and I'm going to, and then when we get to the closing, about a little bit after that, then we're all done. Now, here's the thing though, we're in a very different environment here, especially if it's competitive. How do we just not look like the typical offer, right? That's what we want to do. Is that what you're getting at?
No, I think at this point it is really around the offer process.
Okay.
You know, and then you layer on top of this how you make a successful offer. But I think many people struggle, certainly people who come from different states. In Massachusetts, as you said, it's a two-step process. We have the offer bound with that $1,000 earnest money deposit, and then that second step, purchase and sale, which requires a 5% deposit, sometimes called attorney review in other states, but it's a two-step process. That's kind of the key. And many people kind of struggle a little bit with the process itself, which is, albeit only 4 or 5 or 6 steps, but kind of what is that process?
Right. Yeah. So that's it. So initially you put down the offer, and in your offer has all your terms. When are you going to have a home inspection? Are you going to be getting a mortgage? The dates are going to be in there. So when is the purchase and sale? When are these contingencies going to be completed by? And what date are we going to close? So those are the basic steps that are in an offer, and those dates are typically outlined that you see on the screen there. Do we want to get further into
that? I think that gives us the sense of it, and then it kind of delve in a little bit more detail here around, you know, so what is the inspection? I mean, how does that work?
Okay. All right. So a home inspection. So you have a right to a home inspection in Massachusetts if you want one, and that's one of the terms you will outline in your offer to say, hey, I would like to have this home inspected. And what typically someone does would then hire a qualified home inspector to go look at the home, and you go take a look. All the major components of the home, you know, the roof, the systems, et cetera, and they walk that home, and then they come up with and give you an evaluation of the home. Do things need work? Do they not need work? They also give a lot of good information actually to buyers of how systems work. Like if you're planning on buying this home, and they'll explain a lot of things that maybe people don't understand, like how do you take care and maintenance on certain things, and just understand your home in general. But really what you're trying to do is sort of vet the home. And typically every home is going to have an issue. I've seen new construction have roof issues. You know, it's every home has an issue, and hopefully the sellers understand that going in, and certainly the buyers doing it. And then at that process, when you get back, the buyer's going to get back a report on what the home is, and sort of look at that and understand, all right, is this a home I want to move forward on? Is it a home I want to move forward on if a few things get fixed? Is it something I'll move on with if we can negotiate some of these things for the seller to fix, or maybe negotiate some money off the property because, hey, there's a lot of work here to be done? Or is it something that we just need to walk away from? And sort of understanding what that home inspector tells you is a key part of this process, and it helps you get to that step of moving on to the purchase and sale agreement. And that's something that you end up getting. If there's issues that do come up inevitably, there will be some. It's how do you negotiate those with the seller, with the seller's agent, et cetera. So that's another key skill of a good buyer's agent, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. And you kind of alluded to there in terms of, you know, we wanted in this to give you just a quick overview of some of the inspection strategies. that potential buyer can use?
Oh, sure. All right. So the traditional approach here is you say, all right, we're going to have an inspection by a certain date after the offer is accepted, and you set up the inspection, you go through it, or you could waive the inspection. And a lot we're seeing that some when you in competitive offers, because when there's multiple offers, because people want to be competitive. Now, in that scenario, that's really the buyer's at risk there, because you don't know what's underneath. The home may look fantastic and it may look like it's well kept, but there may be some underlying issues. So it's very risky. I don't recommend buyers not get a home inspection, but what we can do is to do that is maybe have a pre-inspection, especially in this competitive offer. If you're setting up, if you're getting to a point where you really like this home and maybe you have a pre-inspection, right? You come in and you come with a buyer ahead of time and who brings on an inspector and they take a look. It won't be a full comprehensive inspection necessarily, or it could be, I suppose, but really looking at the key major components of the home and give you a general idea of what is the status of this home? Does it need a lot of work? Are things in good shape, et cetera? Then you can walk out of there and then you could put in confidently, maybe waive that inspection, right? And just say, I don't even have an inspection. Now you're looking at, now you have a homeowner who's looking at your offer and maybe one other one, maybe multiples, but yours doesn't have a home inspection. That might be actually worth some money to that seller to say, hey, I could get $5,000 more from this person, or $2,000 or something like that, but this person's not even going to look at my home inspection. I'm not going to have to worry about this. This is a done deal, and move forward. So that's an advantage to a seller. So if you're comfortable getting rid of that contingency, that puts you in a better position to maybe get the home. The other thing we do is sort of, if you want to have the home inspection, is to put in a very large, a larger, what do you call it? Like sort of a cap on the price, in a sense that, hey, and if what my home inspector finds is less than X, here you have $10,000. No worries. We're still going to move forward with buying the home. But if it's something that's really, there's something really major wrong with the house that really exceeds that, well, then we need to talk. So, and if the homeowner understands that they have a good home and it's in good shape, that's not going to bother them at all. So yeah, take a look, because I know there's nothing major wrong with this home. So, it's a strategy.
Yep, not going to nickel and dime.
No,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Right. Now, money.
You don't want to nickel and dime anyway.
Right.
I mean, what's the point? I mean, we're talking about a big purchase here, and nickel and diming really doesn't do anyone any good.
Yep. So, money. Let's talk about money, because ultimately we have to buy this house. So, what are kind of some of the terms that buyers are not very familiar with, that they should begin to kind of think about as they're thinking about understanding the financial aspects of buying a home?
Right. So lenders, they always look at the loan to value ratio. So they want to know basically how much is this home worth, and how much of that am I lending you? Are you looking for a 90% loan, or are you looking for an 80% loan? How much money are you putting down in the process? The more skin you have in the game, it is more attractive to a seller, and also for a lender too, is more likely to lend a home if you have more skin in the game too. They have less risk, in the loan to value ratio, really. But understand too that a lot of times, especially in these competitive situations where homes get bid up, so if a home, an offer is accepted and you're moving forward with a loan, well, the lender is going to send out someone to appraise that home, and that appraiser has their own strict criteria of evaluating that home. It's a little different than what we do. We look at the market, we look at what's sold, and look at a lot of variables, but they look at things a little differently. So just because it's selling for that price doesn't mean that the appraiser is going to appraise it at that price. So it's really, we need to provide a good, well, I guess a good buyer's agent will work with as best they can that appraiser and say, maybe this is how I came up with the price on this home, why this makes sense, so that hopefully the home will get appraised in your favor. And I think what you point down here is, so if a home appraises for lower than the sale price, well, if you have more money you put down, the bank will still lend you, make the loan to you, because their risk is less, their loan to value ratio is going down. And the things that they're going to look at, as you point out here, are your income and your assets and your credit score. So those are all the things that you'll need to disclose with your lender early on in the process, so you understand where you're going in at. But also, I think a key to that is after you buy a home, don't go out and make another big purchase. Don't go buy a car. Don't do anything that would jeopardize, or because the lenders will, when they get closer to the end of the process, we'll just do another check and make sure everything's still in line. And if your credit score drops, or suddenly you have another asset you purchased that's really large, well, that's actually going to come into play. So it's good to understand that going in.
Right, that's true. And I always get this, so how much are closing costs in Massachusetts? Hard question to answer, clearly, but what are closing costs? What are the different components of closing costs?
Yeah. It does vary by different, where you are in the country. But in Massachusetts, like one thing that's Massachusetts, for instance, are tax stamps that you have down there. And basically, a lot of people that when a home is sold, it's based. There's a percentage. It's a price per $1,000 on the home that the state of Massachusetts takes on that. The lenders have all their fees. Now, this is all supposed to be. I think it was the Dodd-Frank way back when they made some reforms. This is all disclosed a lot better than it used to be. All the lenders' fees for like the PMI, the appraisal, survey, all that stuff should be outlined, or is required to be outlined, so you see that up front when you get information from your lender on get your approval on the loan. So all that'll be outlined. But you need to buy homeowners insurance. So there's a cost to that. It's good to know that going up front. Title insurance, the attorney can give you what that cost is, but it's a cost. It's not a big cost, but it's a cost for sure. Tax stamps can be a big cost, and so heating oil. If you have a 250-gallon tank and it's half full, at the closing, they're going to account for that. They're going to take 125 gallons and whatever the cost of oil is, and apply that, and they're going to charge the buyer that. So that's the other thing. And then taxes. So taxes, maybe if they're paid, they're paid quarterly, and they'll look at how much taxes have been paid or how much are owed, and that'll get added in there. Condo fees, you point out here, that's another expense that comes through. So maybe someone owes condo fees, or they've paid ahead. So at the closing, if they paid a whole quarter of condo fees and you're 1 month into it, well, you're going to have to reimburse that person that 2 months. So those are kind of things to understand, that it's sometimes the sale price, that's what you're buying a home for, but there are other costs. That's why everyone's supposed to bring their checkbook to the closing, just in case.
Right, and in order to know how big that check is, it's hard. You will clearly know before closing what that number will be.
Yeah.
But there are a number of closing cost calculators online. And I always recommend to buyers that they go plug in some numbers just to get an order of magnitude number on that. It is much lower than many states. I've bought and sold in Maryland, for example, and closing costs are tens of thousands of dollars. In fact, they're so high, they're often split between the buyer and the seller. But go online, look for those closing cost calculators, and get an order of magnitude of what it will cost. There are many of them out there, and I always recommend buyers do that so they don't get a surprise when they come to the closing or a few days before closing, and they say, "Well, I didn't realize I had to find that much money." So that's a key one to look at.
And that's the other key is working with a good lender will help vet that as well. But a good buyer's agent will point out that these exist and point you in the direction to say, "Hey, make sure you understand these." So talk to your attorney to see how much that's going to be, etc. But on the things that we as an agent know, we're certainly going to recommend that, condo fees, etc. Yeah.
Talking of attorneys, can't I just do it myself?
Never.
Never. No, I choose the answer too as well.
Yeah, no, don't, no. how you do not be your own client in this situation. So there are two. If you're a buyer, there's two attorneys involved. There's one who represents the bank if you're getting a loan, right? So there's a lender, and they make sure all that's done, and then you have your own attorney they've looked at the purchase and sale agreement to make sure everything. A lot of times the purchase and sale agreement actually has a back and forth to it between the seller and the buyer's attorney, and they're going through and so, your attorney as a buyer is going to look at the purchase and sale and say, hey, you know what, I want to add these few things in to protect my buyer, and then the seller may seller's attorney is going to look at that and say, well, I agree with that or don't agree with that, but I also want to add this, and so that gets knocked around in there. So having a great attorney is they're looking out for your best interest from the very start of this process, and making sure that all the language in the purchase and sale is really minimizes any risk to you and puts you in the proper situation. So you really want to have a good real estate attorney that represents you. And so you have an attorney, and if you're getting a loan, the bank is an attorney, but a lot of times in Massachusetts what we see is that one attorney does both jobs, and that sort of simplifies things and it reduces the cost a little bit, which is good for you. And we've worked with a lot of attorneys. We've seen, well, we'll just leave it at that. We've seen the gamut of attorneys, and sometimes it's not the attorney, sometimes it's personality, et cetera. But really, we have a lot of attorneys that we recommend to our buyers, and we recommend them because we've gotten great feedback from our past clients, and to say that, yeah, this attorney was great for me. They help not only just make the transaction go smooth, and not even just understanding the basics of it, but really understand what's in the best interest of their client, and also understand how be able to work with. Again, as an agent, as a buyer's agent, I want to have a good relationship with my clients, and a good attorney will do the same thing. So you're not just a transaction; they're really looking out for your best interest. And the same thing goes with the lenders. I think all the people in this process are super, just incredibly important. That's a big purchase you're going to make at some point, and to have the people behind you that know what they're doing, that are educating you, that are you're involved in a relationship with, that really want to look out for your best interest, and that's really what we want to happen. In the end, it's the best practice, and that's what we want to do, and that's what you should have.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to take this kind of one stage further and say, so that was great, Andrew, thank you for that, but how does this differ in 2020? And let me give you a quick overview of what I mean by that. And think about buying in this environment. And the first question to ask is, when should I buy? And some of this is a little historical, but it'll interesting to show you this, to give you a sense of, where are we today in relation to where we were 3-4 months ago. This is kind of schematically shows the year, as it were, and as you can see by the red line here, open houses ceased completely by about mid-March. They were done. I
remember that weekend.
Right, the last one.
Yep.
Just before the lockdown. And so what happened then is the number of private showings dropped off, but also the number of virtual showings increased dramatically. Many listings, not all unfortunately, but many listings have lots of virtual videos, 3D tours, and so on. And that was the primary mechanism by which buyers used to determine if they were or were not interested in a house. They would vet them completely virtually, and then if they thought it was worthwhile going to see, then they would organize a private showing. And that was kind of what happened in that lockdown period. As we got to May and June, now we're in mid-June, we're definitely kind of in that transition. It transitioned from a lack of confidence, if you will, in terms of the buyers, a lack of willingness in many cases to come out, to one where buyer confidence very much returned, and buyers were expecting to be out, and in many cases buyers expecting to be at open houses. It's the same as before, isn't it? I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how it's not quite the same. We are seeing more and more open houses. They are not the open houses you expected or you anticipate. They are not what was like in the past. They are very restricted in terms of how many people can go through a home. We've had situations where we've had perhaps 50 groups through a 2-hour open house on a Saturday or a Sunday. Now what we're finding is that groups are restricted to about one group in a home, perhaps 2 if it's a larger home, and you're restricted how long you can be in that home perhaps 10 minutes. And so here you are, you've gone from a situation where you had unfettered access to homes in the open houses into a situation where you've got a relatively short amount of time that you can actually be in that home. So even though they are billed as open houses, in many cases they're not the open houses that you were used to back in kind of February, early March timeframe. And buyers are getting much more confidence in terms of going out and looking at different homes. The number of private showings is increasing quite dramatically. And so we're definitely in that situation where buyer confidence is back. Seller confidence, at least the logistics of selling, is still quite hard for an occupied home. And so we're not seeing that many homes on the market, but that will change. But certainly as you go out looking for homes, or while you're looking online, know that there are other buyers out there right now who are looking. So buyer confidence has very much returned. So that's kind of the when. How about the how? Well, we were in the situation where a few towns, I should say, were preventing showings of occupied homes, which clearly made it very difficult to buy a home. We are at the situation where many buyers agents simply weren't accompanying showings. I've shown some homes earlier in the year where the buyer agent said, I'm not going to show the buyer, you do it for me. Scary situations. We had one of our buyer's agents go into a home only to find that what they expected to be a completely vacant home was not. In fact, it was full of people. And so be prepared for that kind of scary situation. What you expect, what you anticipate, what you would ordinarily require, perhaps a vacant home, may not necessarily be the case. So some flexibility is required here, with masks and gloves very much being required. That's kind of key. We've gone from the option of doing everything virtually. We did see some of that earlier on, where people were doing everything virtual. They essentially were not looking at the home before they made an offer. That was perhaps a relatively short period of time. From my own opinion, I didn't think that was sustainable. But to where we are today, which is really do as much as you can online in conjunction with your buyer's agent, and then you have unfortunately that restricted private showings, or perhaps nowadays restricted open houses. So you're going to have a relatively short period of time to go into that home, certainly in comparison to what you had 3-4 months ago. So bear that in mind. It is very much a restriction on the number of showings. And the same applies to inspections too. We've had the situation where inspectors are not allowing buyers to attend. Just tomorrow, I think it is, an inspection where the inspector is going in with 1 or 2 of the buyers, not all of the buyers. And I think that's a problem for me, because there's a lot of flavor you get, a lot of anecdotal information that you get when an inspector, as Andrew alluded to, things like how do you replace the air conditioning filter? That's things that the inspector almost inevitably points out. Small things, but if you're only looking at photos and videos, it's very hard to get that, So you lose, I think, a lot of the flavor. So as you look at home inspectors, make sure that you can go with the inspector. I think for me anyway, that's a given, just because there is so much additional information you get during that inspection. That's kind of key.
Could I also just throw in there too? It also adds context, because if the inspector is just going in there and then you're reading a report later, what you're reading may seem like something horrible, or may seem like there's not a problem. You can't read. You need to have the context of having that conversation with their home inspector to understand what that means. It could have a very different meaning to you out afterward.
Yeah, no question. You're going to read the edited highlights. You're going to read the executive overview. And inevitably the executive overview, the highlights focus on the things which are wrong with the house, not the things which are right with the house.
Right.
So you're going to read the first three pages and think there's so much wrong with it. Whereas actually when the inspector was there, it was like, actually, this is a really good home. I mean, I see a lot of homes of this age that, have all these problems and a lot more. And so you're right. It's difficult to get that context, as you call it, Andrew. Yeah, absolutely. And here I think you need to have some confidence in that extended team, be it the inspector, the buyer's agent. You have that confidence, and even if you don't know an inspector, rely on us to give you the recommendations of inspectors, because we're going to give you inspectors that tell you how it is. I don't want people, inspectors who are covering themselves. I want an inspector that inspires confidence, but explains all of the good things and the bad things. So we have that group of inspectors, attorneys, finance, the works, and you will find yourself relying much more really on that extended team. Financing, a little different. We are finding that banks are beginning to tighten their lending requirements a little. Depends on how this recession plays out. As we talked about right at the beginning of this presentation, that may change even more. There may be a bit more scrutiny on loan-to-value ratios and so on. The appraisal, Andrew talked about the appraisal process, how the mortgage you get is dependent not on the offer price, but on the appraised price. And we have had situations where the appraiser is not actually going into the home. They're doing drive-bys, if you will. So we really aren't able to give the context, as you would say, Andrew, to that offer. There were 20 offers on this home. Are you surprised it went for over asking? A lot of other people thought there was a great deal of value to this home, and that has some influence on the appraiser. If the appraiser is just doing a drive-by, if there is a potential, we'll see as more sales go through here, for lower appraisals. So that's kind of a bit of a caveat, if you like. That to be cautious about, that we may well find. Don't be surprised if the listing agent asks for something in the offer that says it's not dependent on the appraisal. This gives you some context as to why they might actually be saying that.
Right, and appraisers may not be from the. Sometimes you get an appraiser who's not as familiar with the location, and so when they're making their comparisons, they're looking at different, quote, their own set of comps, for lack of a better term. They may not understand. This is where context again comes in. Maybe as a buyer's agent, if you're meeting them, you can explain, hey, about this area, I'll explain why I've used these comps and not these ones, and help them out and help them understand that maybe if they're not quite so familiar with the area. And a lot of times I've been there and inspectors have had, appraisers, have had questions that we might know the answer to, just like because we've learned it from the seller's disclosure or something like that, to say how old is the roof, when was this done, and sort of that helps them pull together their report that may make their appraisal report more complete and more accurate.
So given that we're lacking, in many cases we're lacking it's clearly changing week by week. Things are beginning to loosen up. We're not seeing as many drive-by appraisals, but say if you do, the listing agent does request that you add an appraisal clause in there. Some of the reasons may be that because of these kind of drive-by appraisals. And then finally, almost everything's virtual at the end of the day. A lot of virtual consultations, a lot of Zoom calls or Google Meet calls between the buyer and the buyer's agent. That's kind of, from my perspective, is actually a great tool, because it does allow you to show a wide array of information, not just about the home, but about what's going on. Perhaps to show you the stats from our website and so on. So virtual consultation, a lot of digital marketing. That's the way you do a lot of that initial search of homes. Almost everything's electronic, be it electronic signatures, e-recording at the registry. Hands-off inspections are still there. So it is a little different today, what I've called a virtual home buying process, if you will. But it works. It does work. We've kind of worked our way through many of the issues that we found ourselves in, with perhaps the exception of still it is somewhat restricted in terms of you physically getting in the home. Everything else works. But be prepared that you perhaps won't be able to spend quite as long in a home as you would have previously, and therefore you'll be expected to make a decision based, yes, on a quick show of the home, but perhaps more and more about the digital marketing that's out there, the video, 3D tour, and so on. So be prepared for that. That's still, the state of the industry, if you will, in terms of today. You're not able to see the homes quite as much as you were previously.
Yeah, obviously, I think it's incredibly important to actually see the home, but certainly all these tools being more and more available, well, we've always used them ourselves. It's a critical, but it helps people narrow down and say, yes, this home actually makes sense for me to actually take this next step and go look at. And again, a good buyer's agent too can help make that decision and say, yes, or you weren't considering this, here's why I think you should, or maybe here's why it may not be so good for you. And initiate that in-person showing to help you make that decision, get down to that point in the process.
Yep. And now, so finally, Andrew, you can take it away from here.
Okay. What do we have? Oh, a commitment to you. Yes. Well, sort of just summarizing sort of what we said before, and I think I'll just start off by saying we talked about why that it's important to have a great buyer's agent, but also a great team, because well, the seller has an agent, and maybe they have a great agent, or maybe they have a poor one. And in general, you want to have someone who can work with you to help, get what you want in the end, because you're ultimately working with other people, right? And but in terms of working with you directly, it's what we look at. Our goal is always to educate. We want to educate our clients. We want to give them advice based on information. We've had a lot of experience. We want to share all that with them. We want to help you make the right decision for your financial position in the buying process. We want to find the home that makes sense for you in a place that makes sense, that fits all your needs. Aside from, yes, we have arranged showings, but it's more than that. It's helping you come down and navigate this whole process to get to those properties that you want to see, and then arrange them, and then make a decision based on that. And then we get down, and then once you actually make a decision that you think makes sense for you on a home, it's then strategizing how to craft an offer that is compelling to the seller, right? That is very important in our area right now, and especially at certain price points, but all price points really, but some of them, it's really, really important to know how to craft that offer that really stands out, but still works for you. And then just to give you all the good advice moving forward, after an inspection is done, is this home, do you see anything that gives you pause, or do you see thing and it shouldn't, or do you not see something and it should? It's just, again, it's more information, it's education, it's making good decision, and then it's all the process that goes through. As I said, every transaction is unique. Yes, the physical steps are the same, but because every home is unique, because every person is unique, because every interaction is unique, there's a lot that goes on to that goes just beyond the transactional piece of this, and sort of understanding that and getting to that point is really what we're all about here, and getting the results you want that make you happy and successful.
True. So there's Andrew's details. If you have any questions for us, for Andrew, for myself, whoever, then please reach out to us. We would be more than willing to sit down, be it virtually or be it in person. We can do that too, at a social distance, to talk about what your needs are, and see if we can't get you into the home of your dreams, as it were.
Absolutely. And I will say that is one of the, I think you're right. I think some of the virtual processes that we've taken on here really can be beneficial in terms of things like looking at statistics and looking at things and kind of focusing on things like that. So and please reach out if you do have any questions. I'm just happy to share the information with you. It can be as serious or as casual as you want, and certainly I don't want to. It's a non-pressure situation at all. But I would just be more than happy to talk to you.
Perfect. So with that, we'll say thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you.
Any questions? Let us know. Bye.
Bye-bye.